My name is David Miller, and for years, I lived in the shadow of my younger brother, Kyle. Everyone, from my parents to distant relatives, saw him as the golden child. The one who could do no wrong, who always had the right answers, who excelled at everything. And me? I was just the older brother, always trying to keep up, always just short of their ideal. It was like I was running a race I could never win, no matter how hard I tried. Looking back, it feels like my entire life has been one long attempt to meet my parents' standards. From a young age, I was told that success was measured by accolades, straight A's, sports trophies, and career achievements. I followed the rules. I worked hard, I stayed out of trouble, and I always tried to do the right thing. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. Kyle seemed to effortlessly achieve everything I struggled for. He was the star quarterback, the kid who never had to study but always came home with perfect grades. Our parents couldn't stop talking about his successes. "Kyle's going to be a CEO one day," Dad would say, puffing out his chest with pride. And while I was happy for him, there was this gnawing feeling deep inside me that I couldn't shake. I was invisible. Even when I managed to get my own achievements, graduating with honors, landing a solid job after college, my parents didn't give me the same praise. Instead, they were quick to focus on Kyle's latest accomplishments. I remember one Christmas, Kyle was gifted the newest gaming system, a laptop, and even a vacation to Hawaii with his friends. I got a couple of socks and a "Good job, David" card. The imbalance was so obvious it stung. It wasn't about the presents, it was about the constant validation he received while I worked tirelessly, silently, in the background, never getting the recognition I deserved. It wasn't even about competing with Kyle, though. It was about wanting my parents to see me, to value my hard work. By the time I turned 30, I was married with 2 kids, working as a middle manager at a company where I could see no clear path forward. Sure, I had stability, but I wasn't fulfilled. I was struggling to keep up with the financial demands of raising a family, juggling bills, and trying to maintain a semblance of success, while my brother Kyle was in a high-paying job he loved, living in a beautiful home, and constantly posting pictures of his extravagant vacations on social media. When we all got together for family dinners, Kyle's latest success was always the topic of conversation. "Did you hear about Kyle's promotion? He's moving up so fast," Mom would say, eyes shining. And there I was, silently sitting at the table, pretending to be happy for him while feeling a wave of resentment wash over me. It wasn't just the external accomplishments, it was the unspoken message I was receiving. I was never good enough in their eyes, not because of who I was, but because of who I wasn't. I wasn't Kyle. I didn't have his charm, his seemingly endless success, and I certainly didn't have their admiration. I was the older son who'd made the safe choices, and those choices never seemed to count for anything. Even my wife Sarah started to notice it. "David, why do you always downplay your own achievements?" she'd ask. "You're the one who's been holding everything together for us. Why does it never seem enough?" It was a question I didn't have an answer to. But deep down, I knew. The message had been ingrained in me since childhood. I wasn't the favorite. I wasn't the one who would get the big praise, no matter how hard I worked. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about me being the older, less recognized sibling. This was about a lifetime of being expected to live in someone else's shadow, to constantly chase an ideal of success that didn't even match what I wanted for myself. Something inside me finally cracked, and I knew it was time to stop running. I was done trying to fit into a mold that didn't work for me. It was time for me to take back control of my own story. But I didn't know how yet. By the time I turned 30, my life was a collection of silent struggles, worn-out smiles, and unanswered questions. I was married to Sarah, the love of my life, and we had 2 beautiful kids, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. On paper, my life looked stable. Even enviable, well-paying job, family, and a home, but I couldn't stop comparing it to Kyle's. I had done everything right, yet my life felt so underwhelming. My parents' adoration of Kyle's every achievement only reinforced this feeling, making me question if I was ever going to be more than just the older, responsible brother. The pressure to meet everyone's expectations never left me. From childhood to adulthood, my success had always been framed by what I should be doing, what I was supposed to achieve. I chose a stable career over risky passions, married a kind and supportive woman, and took on responsibilities that Kyle, who was busy building a high-powered career, never had to face. My job at a mid-sized tech firm had been decent enough to provide for my family, but it wasn't a dream. I'd spent years suppressing the part of me that longed for something more fulfilling, something that was truly mine. But the nagging feeling was always there, growing louder, especially when I saw Kyle's life. The more I worked to make ends meet, the more Kyle seemed to live in the fast lane. His career at the law firm had skyrocketed, and now he had a mansion, a brand new sports car, and endless weekends away with his friends. Meanwhile, I was stuck trying to make it all work on a tighter budget, picking up extra work whenever I could, and trying to keep the peace at home. One day, I had a rare moment of respite. Sarah and I were having coffee after the kids were in bed, and I casually mentioned how my company was starting a new initiative that could lead to a promotion for me. I wasn't expecting fireworks, just a simple acknowledgement of the effort I had put in. But when I looked up from my cup, I saw her staring at me, her brow furrowed, concern written on her face. "David," she said, gently, "why are you so quick to downplay your own achievements? You've been working so hard, and you deserve more than what you're getting. Why don't you feel proud of that?" Her question hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to tell her that I had tried, but nothing I did ever seemed to matter, not to my parents, and certainly not to Kyle. The harder I worked, the less recognition I received. It wasn't that I wasn't grateful for everything I had. I was. But the weight of my family's expectations, always comparing me to Kyle, was taking its toll. I realized something in that moment. I had been playing the role of the good, responsible son, sticking to the script, never deviating from what was expected of me. But it had come at the expense of my happiness. I had given up chasing my dreams to follow a path that seemed right for everyone else. And now, with every new success Kyle flaunted, I was left questioning my own worth. But my frustrations weren't just internal. They were affecting my relationship with Sarah, too. She noticed the resentment building inside me, the way I'd become more withdrawn, especially when Kyle's name came up. The conversations at family gatherings were always centered around him, his new achievements, his latest purchase, his success in ways I could never replicate. It felt like my efforts were invisible to everyone but me. There were days when I wanted to scream, to stand up and say that I too deserved recognition, that I too was working hard. But I stayed silent, convincing myself that my quiet struggle was a part of life. After all, didn't everyone face hardships? Didn't everyone have to make sacrifices? The truth was, I had reached a breaking point. The resentment was no longer something I could bury. It wasn't just about being in Kyle's shadow anymore. It was about losing myself in the process of trying to meet everyone else's expectations. And I knew that something had to change, but how? That's when my frustration finally built up enough that it couldn't stay quiet any longer. The tipping point was just around the corner, and I had no idea how much my life was about to shift when I finally gave voice to everything I had been holding in for years. But I could feel the change coming. I was done living in the background, done trying to live up to standards that weren't mine. It was time for me to step into the light, even if it meant shaking the foundations of everything I'd known. It happened on my 40th birthday. After years of biting my tongue and swallowing my pride, I finally cracked. I had always done what was expected of me, worked hard, kept my head down, never rocked the boat, but that evening, something inside me broke. I couldn't pretend anymore. I was done being the invisible older brother who could never quite live up to the golden child. We were celebrating at my parents' house, a typical family gathering filled with small talk, laughter, and the kind of tension that only family dynamics could create. My parents were there, of course, along with Kyle and his wife, Emma. Kyle was always the star of the show. It didn't matter what he was doing. Everyone wanted to hear about his latest career move or the new addition to his house. It had been like this for years, and I was so tired of it. As usual, the conversation turned to Kyle's latest achievement. He had just gotten a massive promotion at his law firm, one that came with a new company car and an even bigger salary. My parents, glowing with pride, couldn't help but talk about it for what felt like an eternity. Kyle's always been so driven, my mom said, almost as if to remind the room. He works so hard, and now he's getting what he deserves. That's why he's going places, David. He's got the whole world ahead of him. My dad nodded in agreement, not noticing the subtle tension building inside me. And there it was, that familiar feeling, the one that had plagued me for most of my life. The feeling of being invisible. The feeling of being the person who did everything right but never got the acknowledgement. My stomach churned. I had been standing there, smiling, nodding along as they discussed Kyle's success, but inside, I was boiling. I had spent years working long hours, sacrificing time with my family, just to make ends meet, and here was Kyle, living in a shiny new world where everything was handed to him on a silver platter. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Enough, I blurted, my voice sharper than I intended. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at me. Even Kyle's usually calm demeanor shifted slightly as he stared at me with a raised eyebrow. You keep talking about Kyle like he's the only one who's worked hard, I continued, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and frustration. What about me? I've worked my ass off to provide for my family, to keep everything running, and all I ever hear is how great Kyle is. I'm tired of it. The silence in the room was suffocating. My parents exchanged quick, worried glances, unsure of how to react. Kyle, ever the smooth operator, tried to brush it off with a half laugh. Come on, David, calm down. It's not like that. No, it is like that, I snapped. I've been sitting here for years, trying to get your attention, trying to prove that I'm doing okay, that I'm enough, but nothing's ever enough, is it? My chest was tight, my heart pounding. For once, I wasn't hiding my resentment. For once, I wasn't going to pretend to be the older brother who was content being overlooked. My mother finally spoke, her voice strained. David, you know how proud we are of you. No, you don't. I cut her off. You're proud of Kyle. You've always been proud of Kyle. I've been doing everything I can to live up to your standards, but it's never enough. It's never been enough. I could feel the tears stinging at the back of my eyes, but I fought them back. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I've been living my life trying to meet your expectations, trying to live in his shadow, but I'm done. I'm done feeling like I'm not good enough. I've worked hard to get where I am, and I deserve more than just a passing acknowledgement. The room was still silent. Kyle didn't know how to respond. My parents were staring at me in shock, probably not sure what to make of this outburst. It wasn't like me to confront them. I had always been the one who kept things inside, who went along with whatever was expected. But tonight, something shifted. I was tired of being the one who silently resented their favoritism. I was tired of letting my worth be defined by how I compared to Kyle. I turned and walked out of the living room, my heart racing. I needed space. I needed to breathe. I didn't know what would happen after this, but I knew that I couldn't go back to being the person I was before. The years of quietly struggling, of suppressing my own dreams and desires to fit into their mold, were over. It was time to finally stand up for myself. I didn't expect my parents to understand right away. I didn't expect Kyle to suddenly recognize my efforts. But for the first time, I felt like I had taken control of my own life. The battle for their approval was over. And somehow, that felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. The only thing left now was to figure out how to move forward without constantly measuring myself against Kyle's life. It was time for me to define my own success. And that, I realized, was just the beginning. The night after my outburst at my parents' house, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, replaying every word I'd said, every stunned face I had left behind. I had expected some sort of backlash, maybe an apology or at least an explanation from my parents, but there was nothing, just silence. The weight of what I had said lingered, but I knew I had done the right thing. Still, I wasn't sure if I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. It wasn't until the next day, when I got a call from my old friend Sam, that the truth hit me. Sam had always been the person I could turn to when life felt overwhelming. He knew the dynamics between me and my family better than anyone. After I told him about the confrontation, Sam was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he spoke, his voice laced with disbelief. "David, do you really not know what's been going on with Kyle?" Sam asked, a hint of concern in his voice. "Your parents, they've been funding everything for him. His house, his car, hell. They even helped him with his law school tuition. I mean, they've been propping up his entire life while you've been out here doing everything on your own." I felt like the ground beneath me had been pulled away. For all these years, I had been slaving away, working myself to the bone, trying to get by. And the entire time, my parents had been quietly bailing Kyle out, providing him with the very things that I had been forced to work for. It made sense now, the sudden bursts of financial success he'd enjoyed, the perfect life he had built. It wasn't all him. He hadn't had to struggle the way I had. My stomach churned as the pieces clicked together. For years, I had assumed that my parents simply didn't understand how hard I was working. I thought they were proud of Kyle because he was, well, better than me. But the truth was much worse than I had imagined. They had been actively supporting him while I struggled to make ends meet, all while pretending that I wasn't worthy of their help. When I hung up with Sam, the reality hit me hard. I wasn't just angry at Kyle, I was furious with my parents. The unfairness of it all, the constant comparing of me to my brother, had been compounded by their deliberate favoritism. They had watched me drown in bills, watch my dreams slip away because I didn't have the safety net Kyle had, and they had done nothing. Worse, they'd kept it all from me, choosing to hide the truth under a veil of tough love. That night, I couldn't hold back anymore. I knew I had to confront my parents again, but this time, I wasn't just angry, I was disillusioned. I needed answers. I needed to know why they had never told me about the money they had given Kyle. Why hadn't they given me that same opportunity? What had I done wrong to deserve being pushed to the brink of exhaustion while Kyle floated through life? I went to their house the following evening, my resolve hardening with every step I took toward the door. When they saw me, my mother immediately looked guilty, but my father's expression was guarded, defensive, as if he had been expecting this confrontation for a while. I wasted no time. "I know about the money," I said, my voice tight. "I know you've been funding Kyle's life. All these years I've been working myself to death, trying to pay off everything while you've been bailing him out. Why? Why didn't you ever tell me about this?" My mother looked down, her hands trembling as she folded them in her lap. My father, on the other hand, took a deep breath and finally spoke. "David," he began, his tone softer than usual. "We didn't want you to feel like we were taking sides. We thought we were helping Kyle get a good start. You were always the responsible one, always seemed to have it all figured out. We thought you didn't need the help." My heart sank. They had always made it seem like my life was easier because I was the responsible one. But what they didn't realize was that their silence had driven a wedge between us. I had never wanted to be treated like I didn't need help. All I had ever wanted was for them to see Meadow recognize the sacrifices I had made to provide for my own family. "That's the problem," I said, shaking my head. "You never thought I needed help. You assumed I was fine, but I wasn't. I've been struggling this whole time, and you never bothered to check in to see if I needed anything. You just let me drown, thinking it was part of my independence." Meanwhile, Kyle had everything handed to him. The truth was out now, and I could see the guilt on my mother's face. She had known. And my father? He just sat there, staring at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. "I'm not angry with Kyle," I said, my voice calm now, but filled with a deep sadness. "I'm angry with you. You both made me feel like I wasn't good enough, that no matter what I did, it wouldn't matter. And all the while, you were helping him. Why didn't you help me?" There was no easy answer. There was no apology that would fix the years of resentment I had built up. But I had said what I needed to say, and for the first time in years, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I wasn't their perfect son anymore. I was David, and I was finally standing up for myself. I left their house that night with no clear idea of what would come next. But one thing was certain: I wasn't going to let them continue to manipulate me into thinking I was lesser. My future was mine to shape, and I was no longer going to let their expectations define it. The days following my confrontation with my parents were difficult, filled with awkward silence and uneasy phone calls. My mom sent a few texts, each one apologizing in that same passive way she always did, as if saying sorry could make everything better. My dad, however, didn't say much. He never was good with emotions. Kyle called too, trying to smooth things over, but his words only made the situation more frustrating. He didn't understand. He hadn't lived it. How could he? He had always been the golden child, the one who never had to struggle. After that heated conversation, I found myself questioning my relationship with my family and what I was truly hoping to gain from them. They had never seen me for who I was. They had only seen what they wanted me to be. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I had spent my entire life trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. I had been working so hard to live up to their expectations, but all I had to show for it was a lifetime of resentment and self-doubt. I realized, more clearly than ever before, that I was living someone else's version of success, not my own. At the same time, something else shifted. I started to feel a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. The burden of needing their approval began to lift. I didn't need to prove myself to anyone, least of all to them. For the first time in my life, I realized that my worth wasn't defined by their opinions or by what they expected of me. I was enough. I was good enough just as I was. But even though I had reached a point of emotional clarity, there was one thing left to address: my future. I wasn't content working in a job that didn't inspire me, feeling stifled by the expectations that came with it. I had always dreamed of being my own boss, of building something that was truly mine. And I realized that if I wanted to move forward and reclaim control of my life, I had to take the leap. I decided to start my own business. It wasn't a big, flashy idea. I didn't need a startup with $1 billion valuation, but it was something that I cared about. I wanted to open a small business that allowed me to use the skills I had developed over the years while still giving me the freedom to live life on my own terms. I started researching, planning, and getting the necessary permits. It was a slow start, but every step forward felt like a victory. I was finally building something for myself. I didn't tell my parents about my decision at first. The last thing I wanted was their judgment or advice on how I should run things. I needed to do this for me. But when I finally did tell them, my mother's reaction was the same as always: dismissive and vaguely supportive. "I hope it works out for you, David," she said, in that way she had always said things. My father didn't even acknowledge it. It didn't matter. I had stopped seeking their approval, and their response no longer carried the weight it once did. I was finally living for myself, not for them. And as time passed, I started to see the fruits of my labor. My business began to gain traction. It wasn't easy. There were bumps along the way, of course, but for the first time, I felt like I was on the right path. Then, a few months later, something unexpected happened. My grandfather, who had always been a steady source of support in my life, called me one evening. "David," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I've been watching you, and I want you to know how proud I am of you for taking this step. You've got a good head on your shoulders, and I believe in you." It was the first time in years that I had heard someone say that, truly say it without the underlying expectation or comparison. My grandfather wasn't comparing me to Kyle. He wasn't placing me next to anyone else. He simply saw me for who I was, and it meant the world to me. As my business continued to grow, I realized that I had built something far more important than a company. I had built my own life, my own identity, independent of my family's influence. I was no longer the older brother in Kyle's shadow. I was David, the man who had taken control of his future and, finally, made something of himself. My family, on the other hand, was still reeling. They had tried to apologize in their own way, but it was clear they didn't fully understand the depth of the hurt they had caused. Kyle, still oblivious to everything, had sent me a couple of texts asking if I wanted to talk things through. But I didn't respond. I had nothing more to say to him. My relationship with my parents had shifted too. I wasn't angry anymore, but I was done trying to prove my worth to them. They had their own way of living, and I had mine. Looking back, I realized the breaking point wasn't just about Thamit, it was about me. I had reached a point in my life where I was finally ready to let go of the need for validation and to start living for myself. And in doing so, I had reclaimed my life. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, that was enough.